When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. Nothing in life matters as much as you think it does while you're thinking about it. This focusing illusion explains why we overestimate the impact of any single factor on our happiness or on our success. If I was skinny, I'd be happy. If I had a different job, I'd be happy. Whatever we're currently focused on seems monumentally important, distorting our judgment and fueling disagreements about priorities. This focusing illusion can warp relationship conflicts. During an argument about housework, chore distribution becomes the defining issue of our relationship. While discussing money, financial management seems like the only thing that matters. When focused on intimacy issues, everything else fades away. Each conversation makes its topic feel like the relationship's central problem, when it's really just what you're thinking about right now. And political discourse exemplifies the focusing illusion. Whatever issue dominates current news seems like the most important thing facing society, like immigration, healthcare, climate change, education. Each becomes the issue when focused upon, and it makes compromise impossible because everyone's kind of focused on different things. This is especially the case with so-called single-issue voters. We can't prioritize when everything seems equally critical, depending on where we're looking. And understanding the focusing illusion can help us maintain some perspective. The issue consuming your thoughts, it's important, but maybe not as important as it seems right now. That disagreement that feels relationship ending, it matters, but it's not everything. When making decisions, we can consciously shift our focus to other factors to break this illusion. What seems monumentally important today might be forgotten next month or altered or changed. This focusing illusion says whatever you're looking at is huge, and wisdom means remembering there's always more outside your current view. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest today on When We Disagree is Wilk Wilkinson. Wilk is a devoted husband, father, Christian conservative, host of Derate the Hate podcast, and volunteer leader with Braver Angels. By offering practical tips and tools for positive change on his podcast, and through his work with Braver Angels, he hopes to inspire others to embrace personal growth, cultivate gratitude, and approach life's hurdles with grace and understanding. Wilk, tell us an argument story.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you first, Michael, for having me here. And I'm somebody, Michael, who's had more than my share of arguments over my time, which is, one of the reasons I started the Derate the Hate podcast. Early on in 2020, with the pandemic, coming into and affecting all of our lives, in a ugly way. There were a lot of conversations that were happening at the beginning, and I was one who was immediately put off by a lot of the things that were happening in response to the pandemic. And I and at the time I was still an operations manager in the transportation world, which is what I came out of when I started doing depolarizing work and podcast work full time. But at the time, I was still an operations manager overseeing several drivers, and in the state of Minnesota, our governor had placed a mask mandate on everybody in public spaces. And I was somebody who strongly disagreed with the idea of having to wear masks. Didn't feel that they were effective, but unfortunately, being in the position that I was in, Michael, I had to enforce a rule that I did not agree with in any way. And it got into a pretty heated conversation between me and one of the drivers that reported to me, and I almost had to let somebody go for not wearing a mask that I knew was absolutely ridiculous. So it was a very tough time for a lot of people, and it put into perspective a lot of things for me in terms of uh, how we deal with people that report to us, that depend on us, and having to enforce rules that we don't agree with, and that one stood out pretty hard for me in terms of personal personal accountability, personal responsibility, and having to do things that we disagree with when we're in positions of authority.
Yeah, say a little bit more about what that conversation felt like. If I'm understanding you correctly, you have to, in this operations manager role, enforce a mask mandate that you do not agree with. You get a challenge from one of your drivers who also doesn't want to wear the mask. Then you have to enforce it at the risk of this person's job potentially.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a very good way to sum it up because the deal is like, so the governor places this statute in place in the state of Minnesota, the state in which I live, that basically says if if you're in charge of this public place and you don't enforce our rule of making sure that everybody's wearing a mask in this public place, we can come down on you as the proprietor of the establishment or whatever it is, so now at this point I'm put in a position where I've got a driver who absolutely does not want to wear a mask, is walking around in the building without a mask. There's all kind of windows on the front of the building that I'm in, and I'm like, okay, now you're putting me in a position to be the bad guy in a situation where I agree with you completely. And so it was one of
Mm.
those things where it's like, okay, well, I am not going to suffer a fine because you don't want to do. I mean, I don't want to do what I'm being told to do, but I'm having to do it, and now you don't want to do it, and I'm going to suffer for it. So it was definitely a conversation. It did get heated. It was ugly. It was
Mm.
not fun at all. Certainly one of the low points of my career at the time, and it drove home for me, Michael, that there are so many things that people don't understand um, when it's outside of their particular lane, whether it be in business or in politics or life in general. I mean, we're just all forced to do certain things that we don't like to do, and it's better to, instead of argue, try to empathize with that person and say, what is it that they're dealing with as opposed to what I'm having to deal with, and a little bit of understanding goes a long way in those situations.
I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about your transition from this operations manager space and into depolarization work and podcasting work when the pandemic was radicalizing for so many people across the political spectrum. And they came out of that experience. And during that experience, they were engaged in lots of demonization of the other side. The other side doesn't care about me and people like me. And then our politics have certainly coarsened, it seems, much more largely since then. You have a different story. You change careers, you get into depolarization work, you're trying to understand where different people are coming from. Talk about that transition if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I was in trucking and transportation, Michael, for 26 years of my adult life. I started driving a truck in 1999, and then became, after 15 years as a driver, in 2014, got into operations management, still within transportation and trucking. Started managing drivers, training drivers, managing the operations at different facilities. And over the course of that time, I mean, I grew as a person. I changed my mindset on a lot of different things, and started working on this personal journey of bettering my life so that I could be a better influence on other people, in business, in family life, all things. And at the beginning of the pandemic, um, I would say I was still quite polarized in terms of politics, and was still engaging in some ugly things online, politically and things like that. So, beginning of the pandemic, I started speaking out about the government's response to the pandemic. I started a podcast that I was really about In the beginning, it was about promoting a very bad T-shirt company that I had, that I thought I could, as long as I could explain to people how ridiculous their point of view was, through these very poorly designed T-shirts, that I could just change people's minds. Well, I figured out very quickly, Michael, that that is not how things work, and through that podcast journey, became part of an organization called Braver Angels that has now become a very big part of my life. I volunteered with that organization for about 5 years, and now I work for them full time. But it it was a transition that, over the course, like I said, of my mental journey, and then realizing that during our own, as individuals, our own journey to bettering ourselves, we can better the way that we interact with each other and make the world a better place.
I'd love to hear you say a little bit more about the movement between, you said, quote, I used to be so polarized that I would say ugly things online. And then, of course, making T-shirts, it sounds like polarized, sort of one-sided T-shirts. Turns out didn't feel like those were very persuasive at all or move the needle. But it's one thing to just kind of stop doing that. And it's another thing to do the opposite. Why did you start doing the opposite?
Right. So one of the big things in my journey, Michael, has been coming to the understanding that you can't hate somebody into believing what you believe. You cannot you cannot hate or berate somebody into changing their mind on a particular topic. And when you would well, you just look at things online nowadays, and the keyboard warriors that use the anonymity of the internet to just berate each other and destroy each other, via the words that they're using, online to say the things that they're saying. I realized very quickly that, uh, you can do a lot more to, bridge divides and open minds by listening with intention, to people that you disagree with. I talk a lot about comfort zone and how we don't grow within our comfort zone. We have to step outside of our comfort zone. Our comfort zone is basically just living within our own silo, listening to people that agree with us on most things, not listening to people that disagree with us on most things. But the reality is, Michael, that I'm not here to change anybody's mind. I'm just here to open people's minds. And the best way to open somebody's mind to what you may believe is to listen to what they believe, and not only what they believe, but why they believe it. We cannot, again, I'll go back to what I said. You can't hate or berate somebody into believing what you believe. But but if we listen to people with intention, and find out why they believe what they believe, they might just listen to why you believe what you believe, and there we can probably find some common ground in terms of, where we're at, where we want to go, and how we're going to get there.
You mentioned that you're not here or you're not in your work to change minds, and I take that for what it is. But I also hear at least a position on how minds change that you would like others to accept, which is that you might not be trying to change people's minds about X, Y, and Z or the Republican or Democratic Party or masks or vaccines or something, but you do have a position about how minds change that you would like people to be more open to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, well, the only way your mind will ever change is if you're open to the idea that you might be wrong. And I think that takes a lot of courage. It takes an awful lot of courage to sit there and say, I might be wrong about a particular thing, but we'll never get there by trying to hate somebody into our position. So I have my beliefs and I have my strongly held convictions when it comes to politics and things like that, Michael. But
Mm.
but when I'm having a conversation with somebody, I'm not there to try and change their mind on whether they believe, abortion is right or wrong, or guns are right or wrong. I mean, I know where I stand on both of those issues, but if we can have a conversation without me trying to browbeat you into believing what I believe, if you just open your mind to the idea that, you know what, the way that I see this thing, and I try to enter into every conversation that I'm having in the same way. is I might not have all the facts. I might have oversimplified something along the way and made it into something that it's not, or this thing could be far more complex than I ever thought about. But if I open my mind to the idea that there is more to this than I've been aware of, then I can learn something. And I hope that by doing that, that the person that I'm engaging with does the same thing. And again, we may not find any common ground on a particular thing, but at least we're not beating each other up trying to make sure that you believe what I believe or I believe what you believe.
There's a certain set of perspectives, we could even call them skills, that your approach seems to imply. And I'll read off a few of them to you, and I'd love to hear you either negate those or add to this list. So, embracing complexity and gray areas of issues that we might think we have settled to that event, diminishing our own sense of righteousness and what we can really know, which also means increasing our own humility, perhaps also increasing our curiosity about the things we don't know, as well as people we don't know and what in their life has led them to believe the things that they currently believe without shaming those, and then kind of keeping an open mind as we go about engaging the world and one another. What would you add or subtract from that list?
Well, I think you nailed it. When you start talking about words like complexity, curiosity, humility, things like that, Michael, you're really grasping the whole way that we have to be able to interact with each other in a civil society. Engaging with curiosity, having the humility to believe that we could be wrong, or did not see the full complexity of an issue. I mean, these are all hugely important things in our interaction. One of the things that I would add to that is we have to give people the latitude to be wrong. In the sense that we. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I know that I've not. I mean, I've been wrong about things plenty in my life. And if I didn't surround myself with people, and there was a time when I didn't, but if I didn't surround myself with people that gave me enough latitude to be wrong and then encourage me to learn from the mistakes that I have made, I wouldn't be where I am today. So, I mean, one of the big things that I would say, and like I said, you nailed it with the curiosity, the humility, the complexity, and not boiling things down to just black or white. There's a lot of gray area and a lot of things, but give people the latitude to be wrong on
Mm.
things, encourage them and help them when when especially when people have that aha moment, when you have the right kind of interaction and you're listening to somebody with intention and they know that you're listening to them with intention, and then they listen back with intention to you, and all of a sudden you see that light bulb go off and they'll be like, oh, I never thought of it that way. I mean, one of the greatest books
Mm.
that from a fantastic friend of mine, Monica Guzman, who's also done a lot of work with Braver Angels. She wrote the book I Never Thought of It That Way, and and it's just when somebody has that aha moment, I never thought of it that way, and they see things for the first time through a perspective that they didn't see it before. It's a beautiful thing. So, like I said, you're not going to hate people into believing what you believe, but if you have the right kind of conversation, it might open their mind to the idea that there was something there that they didn't see that they will see now.
Let's do a thought experiment where a voting majority, 51%, 61%, 71%, whatever the number is, a voting majority of the country embraces these skills, these gray areas, complexities, humility, and so forth. And we have a voting majority of people who have diminished their own righteousness and are really curious about having "I never thought of it that way" moments. What is your hopeful outcome as to the world that those folks could create?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think of we've boiled down politics in this country in so many ways now, Michael, to like a zero sum game, right? In order for me to win, you have to lose. But if we start having real curious conversations again, and then start working with each other again, and the idea that I'm not going to get everything that I need all of the time, and you're not going to get everything that you need all of the time. But if we both realize, and when I say both, I mean when we're talking about sides or whatever, if we start to realize again that we are together, we are going to be something greater than the sum of our parts. And if we start to work with each other and try to synergize rather than work on these lose-lose things, to quote Stephen Covey from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, instead of constantly looking at, lose lose or win lose situations, but we try to come together and synergize through curious conversations, intentional listening, and working with each other, we can come to much greater solutions and have a true sum greater than a true whole greater than the sum of its parts. But if we continue on this zero sum game where it's in order for me to win, you have to lose, ultimately that's a race to the bottom and we all lose.
I always try to save the best one for last. So here comes the last one. We'll see if it's the best. When is it ever important to close your mind about either people or topics?
Oh, close. you know, that is that's an interesting question that I'd never heard of or thought of before. But the reality is when so like I said, I've got strongly held convictions on certain things, and there are things that we have to truly understand as facts. If for instance, if somebody comes up to me and says that um, uh, water's not wet and gravity doesn't exist, and that's where we're starting this conversation. I think I can, confidently say this conversation is probably not going to go anywhere productive. We can try for a minute or two, but I don't have to be a martyr for your cause. I'm not going to sacrifice my peace of mind because we can't agree on certain facts. So, uh, there's going to be times, Michael, where people are having conversations, and one side of that argument is just going to be completely incapable of working from a fact-based area, and at that point, I think it's best to say, look, I don't think we're starting in a good place. I don't think we're going to get to a good place. I appreciate you as a human being, and I wish you the best, but I can't be a martyr for your cause, and it's time for me to move on.
Wilk Wilkinson, thank you so much for being open-minded on When We Disagree. When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.